Hello folks and welcome back to another episode of History on the Run. And in today's video we're going to be looking at Union Pacific's Challengers. Now Union Pacific is weird because unlike most railways they had two different classes of Challenger, but yet they were the same Challenger. You had the 3800 series and then you had the 3900 series. 3900 series is obviously the series that everybody knows and loves, such as 3985. Those are the really cool Challengers. However, there's really not much difference in performance as far as tractive effort goes, other than maybe, the boilers were easier to maintain. They're a little smaller, maybe they burnt less fuel. But they're all around 97,000 pounds of tractive effort. So, kind of neat locomotives. For those of you that don't know, we did have these on a locomotive comparison video a little while back, and ever since then I've been thinking about Challengers. Challengers. There's not enough challenging Challengers to think about. But yes. Anyways, without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so before the Union Pacific Challenger was built, the UP had been playing around with Mallet-type locomotives, which were okay in the aspect that they pulled a lot of freight. The problem was they were slow because the front cylinder sets were quite large and off-balanced, and they hammered the track and caused a lot of unnecessary wear to the railroad, which meant they weren't really good and they held up the fast freight, so they needed a new locomotive. And this is where they came up with the idea of the Bull Moose, which is a 2880. The problem is, it is a consolidation on steroids. It wasn't quite good enough for what they needed it to do. It did get them through places like Sherman Hill with, sharper curves and the need for a lot more power, but it wasn't exactly what they really needed. So they came up with a Challenger, which is a 4-6-6-4 type wheel arrangement. Notice it's got a trailing truck, so it's got a bigger firebox than a consolidation or just a Bull Moose, which means that it has more power. And it's got 70-inch drivers, which again means it can go faster. So we have speed and power. That's a very good combination. The locomotives were very, very capable, but when the engineers were on the board of designing it, they were considering it a challenge because, again, this is a very early simple articulated locomotive, which means they weren't entirely sure it was going to work. It was kind of experimental. It was a thing that they were going to try, and guess what? Spoiler alert, it worked. The locomotives not only proved to take on the challenge of Sherman Hill for the time, they were quite good at their job. They were able to pull freight quite fast, and they were quite smooth. The crews really liked them, and because they were so smooth, they ended up becoming the largest dual-service locomotive in the United States. And the reason for that is the locomotives were not intended to run exactly smooth for passenger service. They were freight locomotives. But it just so happened that the locomotives ran so smooth in freight service that they said, I'd reckon we could put a passenger train behind it, and well, they did, and it worked. In fact, it worked quite well, so these locomotives would also pull fast passenger trains if they were too long. So they were really good locomotives that could do just about anything, a real workhorse for the Union Pacific. The Challenger for Union Pacific was built by Alco between 1936 and 1944. There was 105 of them produced, plus 6 for the Denver and Rio Grande Western, which I believe there's more for the Denver and Rio Grande Western if I remember correctly, because the D&RGW also purchased some of the old style Challengers for the D&RGW, plus I believe either they were leased, I think they would have been leased the D&RGW during wartime, for needing more power. However, don't quote me on that. We're not here for the D&RGW Challengers. We're here for the Union Pacific Challengers. The locomotives were 121 feet, engine and tender. They would have a boiler pressure of 255 psi and had a tractive effort of 97,000 pounds. Their max speed was 70 miles per hour, and only 2 of them survived. Besides, they were one of the best locomotives for their time, besides Big Boy. But Big Boy didn't get to see as much of the country as the Challengers did. But only 2 of them survive, 3985 and 3977. 3985, as you all know, were part of the Union Pacific Steam team, which is pretty cool. So there's plenty of video out there of that train running excursions. However, it would eventually be donated to the Railroading Heritage of Midwest America in 2022, where it is currently undergoing a restoration. Number 3977 sits on static display in North Platte, Nebraska. And of course, it is wearing the Greyhound color scheme for those of you that might only recognize it by that, which is pretty cool. But the locomotive, none of them currently operate, but they are so cool. Hopefully we get to see 3985 running again here shortly. But yeah. Now you might be wondering what happened to those 6 Challengers that went to the Denver and Rio Grande Western. Well, they were being built for the Union Pacific during World War II, but the War Department Defense Plant Corporation decided that since the Denver and Rio Grande Western needed more motive power due to a traffic surge, they would send 6 of those Challengers. They would have been numbered 3900 through 3905 from the Union Pacific and just sent them from Elko down to the Denver and Rio Grande Western. The problem was the D&RGW hated these locomotives. The reason for that was they owned other Elko Challengers, but the older style, and they decided that they liked the old ones better and they hated the new ones. These more modern Elko Challengers weren't really their cup of tea. And after the war and the traffic surge went down, they sold them to the very first person that would buy them. This was the Clinchfield Railroad, and that's where you get Clinchfield 670 through 675 from. Later on, Union Pacific 3985 would actually play a little dress up and dress up as Clinchfield 676 and pull the Santa train. Here's a fun fact for y'all. This is a Denver and Rio Grande Western Challenger, one of the older style Challengers. And as you can see, it's got a funny looking box on the pilot, and I've always wondered what that is, and I recently learned that that's actually a sandbox. They put extra sand inside that box to help with, well, adhesion. Because these locomotives had to go through the mountains, they used a lot of sand, and they figured it would be good to put more sand in the front of the locomotive. Plus, when you think about it that way, it would add a little bit of weight to the front frame, which would add a little bit of adhesion just because of the weight of the sand, and that would assist the locomotive because those front wheel sets are lighter and they slip a little easier. So you need more sand. They gave all the sand in the front wheel set, and there you go. So that's a little fun fact for y'all. Now, we all know that the Union Pacific was the first railroad to purchase Challengers, hence why they got to name them, but they also influenced other railroads to buy Challengers, such as the Western Pacific, the Western Maryland, the Delaware Hudson, the Great Northern, the Northern Pacific, the D&RGW, the Clinchfield, and the New York Central. And later on, Union Pacific would get a big brother for Challenger, known as the Union Pacific Big Boy, which is essentially a Challenger, just more bigger. They just made it longer, they added an extra set of drive wheels. Again, also built by Elko, and everybody knows what this thing is. And no matter who built them, whether it was Elko, which built the most, but a few of them were built by Baldwin, which copied Elko patterns, every railroad seemed to love them. For the most part, except for the D&RGW, who did not like the more modern Challengers. But that was just a preference thing. They still really liked the Elko Challengers, just the older ones. Which was probably just because they had a bunch of the older ones and the modern ones had different specifications on them. They were done to Union Pacific specifications, so I'm sure that changed things for them. Maintenance was different than the rest of them, which was kind of a head scratcher. But other than that, everyone seemed to like these Challengers. They seemed to get any job you needed to get done. They had the power to do it, and they could do it fast. If you need to put them on a passenger train, they seem to be able to do that too. They even made it a preservation, and that's pretty cool. Though I wish we had more locomotives like them in preservation. We only have the 2. They are really cool examples though, but they do reflect on the rest of their class as being super cool locomotives. But anyway folks, that's going to wrap it up for today's video. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please like, subscribe, share the video with your friends and family, and as always folks, see you on the rails. Wait, what are y'all still doing watching the video? Alright, this locomotive's fake. It's photoshopped. It's literally just a Challenger frame with a New York Central Niagara boiler that's been stretched to fit the frame. Other than that, it's fake, alright? I just threw this in the video earlier just to see what could get started up in the comment sections of either people going, he doesn't know what he's talking about, or they're gonna be saying things like, this existed? So, yeah, this is a little treat for like the 5 of my viewers that still watch my videos to the very, very end. Hi, how are you? So I hope y'all enjoy this little extra thing I just threw in the end of the video for y'all. Watch, this will be when everyone watches to the very end. But anyway, thanks for watching again. Bye!